I welcome you all to the second lecture of this course, and this is the second lecture of the module 1. So, the first module we are discussing the first module. So, first module is about introduction to positive psychology, and this is the second lecture. So, this lecture is titled as Flourishing, Well-being and Positive Mental Health. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture, that is lecture number 1. So, in the lecture 1, we basically introduced the positive psychology as a discipline or sub-discipline. We defined what is the meaning of positive psychology. We then discussed the 3 main pillars of positive psychology, that is positive subjective states, positive traits and positive institutions. We discussed what is the meaning of all these 3 pillars and what are studied under these 3 pillars. We also talked about or gave a brief historical background of positive psychology. What are the important events that led to the development of positive psychology? We also discussed in the last lecture what is the need for studying positive psychology, why it became so popular, what is the significance of studying this positive psychology. So, we discussed some of the major reasons behind the development of positive psychology or the popularity of positive psychology. We also discussed how positive psychology is related to other sub-disciplines of psychology like social psychology, clinical psychology, personality psychology and so on. We said that that positive psychology has now almost got integrated into all the sub-disciplines, and people from all the sub-disciplines of psychology are including or integrating positive psychology theories and concepts in studying their sub-disciplines. We also discussed how positive psychology is connected or related to humanistic psychology and how it is different from humanistic psychology. And at the end, we addressed whether positive psychology is indifferent to sufferings and negative states. We addressed this issue. So, these are some of the things that we discussed in the last lecture. In today's lecture, we will be focusing on the concepts related to positive mental health and well-being, because these are foundational concepts of positive psychology. So, in this module, we are basically giving some foundational knowledge of positive psychology, and then from the next module, we will be talking about specific topics. So, we will be talking positive mental health and well-being, what is the meaning of these terms. We will be talking about the concept of hedonism versus eudaimonism, how they are related to well-being. We will be talking about psychology of hedonic well-being, what is the meaning of hedonic well-being and what is included under this. We will be talking about the psychology of eudaimotic well-being and what are included under this, what indicators are included under this. We will also see some of the theories that integrate both hedonic as well as eudaimotic well-being concepts in theories. We will be talking more specifically 2 important theories. One is Key's 13 dimensions of mental health and flourishing, and Martin Seligman's PERMA model. So, let us start today's lecture. So, let us start with the concept of the meaning of positive mental health and well-being. In order to understand the meaning of mental health and well-being, we need to start with the concept of health itself. Now, WHO defines health, which is a very popular and one of the most cited definition of health, which says health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of diseases or infirmity. So, here WHO defines health as a state of well-being. Now, what kind of well-being? Physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, and not just absence of diseases. So, generally when we talk about health, we generally understand health as an absence of disease. So, when somebody does not have any disease, we call that person as healthy. Now, WHO says the holistic or the true meaning of health happens or will come only when you do not have disease, obviously, then not only just absence of disease, but also presence of some positive qualities or state of well-being, which includes physical health, mental health and social well-being also, physical, mental and social well-being. So, in one sense, this definition is saying health is a state of well-being, not just absence of disease. So, well-being term is coming in the definition of health. So, here it is very clear, the definition of health also includes mental health, physical health and social aspects of well-being. All these 3 are connected to each other. WHO also defined mental health again as a state of well-being. Here again they are saying it is a state of well-being in which individual realizes his or her own abilities. So, this is one important aspect of mental health according to this definition, that you realize your own abilities, your own potentials, your own capabilities. You can cope with the normal stresses of life. You are able to deal with the normal problems and challenges of life. Obviously, extraordinary situation, everybody is overwhelmed, but normal issues and difficulties and challenges of life, one is able to deal with them. Can work productively and fruitfully. One is able to productively work, contribute to whatever domains they are functioning and working, and able to make a contribution to his or her community. And also you are able to contribute to the social groups or communities in which you are living. So, basically you also extend your functioning beyond yourself also to the other people. So, these are like ideal definitions of mental health, which includes all these parameters or all these indicators. But at the end, one of the most important aspect of this definition is again here, it is saying mental health again is a state of well-being. Health was also defined as a state of well-being, mental health is also defined as a state of well-being. So, in all the definitions of health, well-being is coming again and again. So, this definition clearly indicates that mental health is more than just absence of mental illnesses. Absence is obviously important. You cannot be healthy when there is a disease. But in a true sense, in a holistic sense, mental health is a state of well-being just beyond just physical illnesses. So, in this position, in the positive sense, mental health is the foundation for well-being and effective functioning for an individual or community. Okay. So, mental health is a foundation for well-being. So, well-being and mental health and general health, these are all connected to each other. So, all this definition also suggest that mental, physical, social functionings are interdependent. We cannot look at these things isolated way. For example, when we talk about physical health, you cannot be in a true sense physically healthy when your mental health is not proper. If you are mentally disturbed, it will impact your physical health also. You will not be able to take care of health. When your physical health, if it deteriorates, it can also influence your mental health. When you have a chronic diseases, it makes people anxious, people got into anxiety mode and so on, it deteriorates mental health. So, similarly, when you are not mentally healthy, physically healthy, you will not be able to contribute to the social aspects of your life. You cannot productively function in society. So, social functioning is also connected to that, right. So, all these dimensions are interconnected to each other. Now, despite these connections, we generally do not focus on mental health, we focus only on physical health. We all are aware of physical health and we immediately go to a doctor when something goes wrong with the body, but true physical health also cannot be achieved without having proper mental health. So, this is not a luxury. Mental health or taking care of mental health is not luxury, it is an essential thing, even the foundations for physical and social functioning and so on. So, mental health is often generally, when we talk about use this term mental health, we generally use it in a synonymous way with the mental health condition or illnesses like depression, anxiety and so on. So, mental health is most of the time understood as having disorder or not having disorder. Like mental health condition, when we say, that means what is your state, conditions of mind, like are you having disorder like depression, anxiety and so on. However, this concept is more than that. When you talk about mental health in a true sense, in a broader sense, it obviously addresses the disorder part, and at the same time whether the person is experiencing positive states or not, positive health or flourishing life or not. So, therefore, it is not just a simple concept of having disorder or not having disorder. So, when we talk about mental health, the two major dimensions we need to look at it. One is the illness part of it, mental health conditions and illnesses, and second is positive mental health, which talks about things like happiness, life satisfaction, self-realization, meaning in life and so on. Both the dimension has to be studied when we talk about mental health. So, when we talk about well-being, it is mostly concerned with this part. Well-being is concerned primarily with the promotion of positive mental health experiences. So, when we use the term positive mental health, we are also actually talking about the concept of well-being. So, mental health is a broad concept which also includes the concept of diseases and positive mental health. Positive mental health is primarily focused on the positive states of experiences and state of well-being. So, when we talk about well-being, it is actually connected to the concept of positive mental health only. So, Now, let us look at the concept of well-being itself. What is well-being? Now, when we looked at the definition of health, when we looked at the definition of mental health and its different aspects, well-being was coming again and again. So, what is this concept of well-being? And this concept is at the foundation of positive psychology. We cannot talk about positive psychology without understanding well-being as a concept. Now, what is the meaning of well-being? Now, well-being, one of the very general definition of well-being is that it refers to optimal functioning and experience. Okay. So, these two terms are very important. One is you are in a state of well-being only when you are experiencing optimal functioning, means functioning at your best. So, that is called optimal functioning. You are able to function in a proper way to the best of your abilities. So, that is called optimal functioning. Optimal experience means again your experience of life is optimum. You are experiencing life in a very positive way, in a very productive way, in a positive sense. So, your experiences of life in terms of emotions, in terms of how do you perceive the life, how do you think about life, all these experiences are positive at the optimum level to the best of your capability. So, when you are functioning level as well as when your experiential aspect of your life both are at the optimum level, then we can say you are experiencing a state of well-being, which is foundation of your health, foundation of your mental health also. So, this is a very general definition and it includes the gist of what is the meaning of well-being. Now, well-being has also been defined in various other ways. For example, the Royal Society in the UK defined well-being as positive and sustainable mental state that allows individuals, groups and nation to thrive and flourish. So, well-being has also been conceptualized at the individual level, it has also been conceptualized at the group level, society level, community level, country level, even at the global level. So, nowadays people also, there are large scale surveys that are done at the country level where well-being and happiness index of countries are calculated and they are compared which country is doing better and which country is not doing so good. So, all this at the global level also, at the country level also, well-being indexes are calculated, happiness indexes are calculated, which shows that well-being can be studied at the different units, individual level, society level, family level, country level, global level and so on. So, depending on the different indicators and so on. So, well-being as a concept can be extended to various units of study, not just individuals, but as psychology mostly focuses on the individual level. To some extent it focuses on the group level also, but majorly it does focus on individual level. So, this means at the level of individual, well-being refers to psychological, physical and social states that are distinctively positive. Okay. So, well-being in a nutshell we can say it is about enriching human life and enhancing human functioning. So, we are talking about enhancing well-being, or when we are addressing the concept of well-being, we are talking about enriching human life, means enriching the experiences of human life, which is important part of well-being, and also we are enhancing human functioning. We are trying to promote or expand the functioning of human being. Now, when we talk about well-being, it has also been conceptualized or defined from different perspective or different concepts. One of the ways to look at it is that there can be 4 categories where the definition can fall. We can define well-being from different categories. One is what is the orientation in the definition of well-being. Means, are you defining well-being from what a person seeks in life and why, based on the values, motives, ideals and goals. So, this is one way we can define well-being, based on the orientations, what person is seeking in life and why it is seeking. Based on that, one can also define well-being. Some definition falls into that. Based on the behaviors of individuals, we can also define well-being, like what actual activities people do, whether engaging in pleasurable activities, attending parties, what kind of things you are doing, or attaining goals, achieving goals, what kind of behavior is contributing to the well-being of that person. Okay? So, we can also define well-being from the behavioral perspectives. We can also define well-being from the experiential perspective, like your typical feeling states, emotions, thought processes. From that also we can define well-being. So, if you are experiencing positive emotions, positive thoughts, we can say it is contributing to well-being. So, this could be another category where well-being can be defined. The last one is functioning level, where we can talk about how well a person is doing in life in terms of abilities, accomplishment, health habits, etc. So, well-being can have all this connotation, but primarily, as we said in the first definition, it majorly focuses on experiences of life and functioning of life. Some people also looked at orientations and behaviors and so on. Now, based on, if you look at philosophical debates on what contributes to well-being, how should we define well-being, there are two major schools of thought in terms of defining what is well-being, how it should be defined, what should be the indicators of well-being. There have been debate about this concept of well-being, but mostly if you see all the arguments, they will fall under two major categories or schools of thought. One is hedonism and another is eudaimonism, hedonic school of thought or eudaimonistic school of thought. So, mostly we can define. So, how these two are different and what is the conceptualization of well-being in these two schools of thought? Let us see. Now, if you see hedonism, you can see in this table, these two are distinguished based on the concepts. Hedonic school of thought or hedonic well-being is conceptualized based on pleasures and happiness. So, according to this school of thought, if your life has lots of pleasures and happiness or full of happiness, it can be called as high hedonic well-being you are experiencing. On the other hand, eudaimonistic well-being says well-being is more than happiness or momentary pleasures. It is more about actualization of human potentials. It is about fulfilling one's true nature and diamond. It says conceptualizing well-being only based on emotional experiences or momentary pleasures is not sufficient. Well-being should be conceptualized based on, are you able to actualize your potentials, are you expanding your capabilities, are you fulfilling your true nature, are you expanding, are you doing meaningful things in your life and so on. All these concepts are connected to the eudaimonistic well-being. So, eudaimonistic well-being conceptualizes well-being from such kind of concepts. So, in more detailed way it is shown in the table. So, hedonic well-being includes, content includes pleasures, enjoyment, satisfaction in life, comfort in life, painlessness in life and so on. So, these are the things that are given importance in the hedonic schools of thought. On the other hand, eudaimonistic school of thought includes things for well-being, things which are important for well-being or necessary for well-being, like meaning in life, values, what kind of values you have in life, relevance to a broader context in life. Are you just thinking about yourself or are you also kind of looking at the broader context of life? It also talks about personal growth, self-realization, maturity, excellence, ethics, quality, authenticity and autonomy, integration and so on. So, if you look at these concepts, eudaimonistic well-being is conceptualized based on these higher order concepts which are related to more long term meaning of life, which are related to seeking growth in life or self realization, maturity in life, expanding in life and so on, personal growth and so on. So, this is how conceptually they are different from each other. So, hedonism is mostly related to the mindset focusing on the self, present moment and mostly on focusing on the tangible thing what you can experience in life. You can get pleasures in life in a very tangible way, and mostly it is focused on what am I getting from life in the present moment and mostly focusing on the self only. You are thinking about how you can make your life more full of happiness and full of pleasures and so on. On the other hand, eudaimonistic concept is mostly associated with the mindset which focuses on balance of focusing on self and others. It also looks at others, your relationship with other people and so on. It is not just focusing on yourself, it also has a balance on focusing on the present and the future. Eudaimonistic well-being, most of the concepts are related to how you visualize your life in the future and how you are shaping it in those direction. So, it is a tendency to be guided by abstract and big picture concepts and focus on cultivating and building what one values and envisions. So, it is more like big picture of life, more meaningful life, and you see the context of life and so on, goal seeking and so on. So, this is how fundamentally these two approaches differ from each other in terms of conceptualizing well-being. Now, let us see the historical roots of these two schools of thought, how historically we can locate them. So, the debate between this hedonism and eudaimonism has a long history. There have been always people taking one side or other side. In the 4th century BC, this debate was prominent between two great Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Aristippus. Aristotle was the proponent of eudaimonism, and he suggested that a good life should be in accordance with our true nature, virtues and reasons. In fact, this whole term eudaimonism was proposed by Aristotle, and he said good life should be defined in terms of whether you are living your life in accordance with your true nature, virtues and so on. So, that is typically eudaimonistic thought. Aristippus, another philosopher, he was on the view that he was proponent of hedonism and said that pleasure is the only good in life and pain is the only evil. The goal of life should be to gain maximum pleasures and happiness in life. So, his approach was different from Aristotle's approach. He said that is the only evil in life is pain. So, avoid that, get maximum pleasures and happiness and so on. So, he was typical proponent of hedonism. Since then, many philosophers took side, both the side, some took hedonic side, some took eudaimonistic side. For example, Hobbes, Bentham took the side of hedonism, while Plato, Immanuel Kant took the side of eudaimonism. So, like that this debate has been going on and on, people sometimes in the historically taking sides, one side and the other. So, we will see how we look at this in the field of psychology a little later. So, there has also been some people also said that these two concept of well-being also has biological roots. So, if you look at human brain has two important systems broadly. One is called hot system in the brain, which is basically the older subcortical part of the brain, means the brain which is below the cortex. So, there is an upper part of the brain which is typically this part of the brain, which consists of gray matter, upper part. Below the upper part there is a subcortical. So, area which lies below the cortex. Cortex is this upper part, below the cortex is subcortical region. So, that region we generally share it with other animals also. So, it involves most of the voluntary involuntary functions, like most of the important vital functions are controlled by this subcortical part, like emotions and other things. A lot of these vital functions of breathing and heartbeat and so on, a lot of these things are actually controlled by this subcortical part of the brain. Now, this is called as a hot system of the brain, the lower part, subcortical region, while the upper part, the cortex or the gray matter part is called as cold system, which is newer cerebral part of the brain. So, if you see the brain, this both part functions differently and in alignment with one of this well-being. So, if you see the subcortical part, it is mostly focusing on the emotions and pain and pleasure. So, this part actually controls hedonic well-being part, and if you look at the upper part, the cerebral cortex part, it focuses on the thought processes, thinking and complex thought processes, decision making and other thing, which is called as a cold system. It is more connected to the eudaimonistic well-being part of it. So, if you our brain itself is divided into both the sense of well-being. Subcortical part is mostly connected to pleasure seeking, avoiding pain and the most of the emotional experiences. So, hedonic well-being is connected to the subcortical regions of the brain, and the cortex part, the upper part or cortical part, which is also called the cold system, actually controls or is connected with the eudaimonistic well-being, where you think about future and think about goals, think about meaning of life. These are all connected to the higher cognitive processes, and it is generally controlled by this upper part of the brain, which is called as a cortical part. So, brain itself has both the types of well-being in terms of it is designed like that, you know. So, it is biologically somehow ingrained that both the well-being we kind of seek both of the aspects of well-being. So, most of the psychologists, you know, in the area of well-being research, they generally suggest that people need both the aspects of well-being in a true sense to be called as experiencing well-being. To experience the true sense of well-being, we need both hedonic as well as eudaimoc aspects to flourish in life. Each aspects could be, you know, the just half part of the story, but if you can make balance between both hedonic well-being as well as eudaimoc well-being in life, then we can experience the true sense of well-being. So, hedonia and eudaimonia are not opposites, nor they are mutually exclusive. They are complementary psychological functions. Furthermore, a person may derive hedonic benefit, but a eudaimoc loss from an activity and the vice versa. So, it is therefore important to assess both the hedonic and eudaimoc variables when studying well-being outcomes. So, it is possible both are connected also. It is also possible sometimes when you have higher hedonic well-being, it can lead to higher eudaimoc well-being also and the vice versa, or sometimes they may not be connected also. So, in a true sense, in a holistic sense of well-being should include both the aspects of well-being, that is hedonic well-being as well as eudaimoc well-being. So, that is the general idea in psychology, you know. True sense of well-being is measured using both the dimensions. Now, let us see how this both hedonic concept of well-being and eudaimoc concept of well-being is studied in psychology. In psychology, as we said, this is based on scientific methodology. So, we have to define all the concepts based on how they can be conceptualized and measured in real life. You know, we cannot just give an abstract definition and then we cannot study them scientifically. So, let us see how hedonic well-being is studied and conceptualized in psychology. Till now we have discussed only philosophical debates and the distinction between these two concepts. Now, let us see how it is actually studied in the field of psychology. So, in psychology we adapted hedonic view and both the aspects are studied. Let us see first how hedonic well-being is studied in psychology. So, psychologists who adopted the hedonic view have tended to focus on broad conception of hedonism. So, it is not just typically concept of pleasures is not just included in the concept of hedonism in psychology. We use a broad conceptualization of hedonism in psychology. How it is conceptualized? Hedonic well-being in psychology, we call it technically called as a subjective well-being. So, hedonic well-being is technically in psychology it is called as a subjective well-being, which means same thing. Now, captures the presence of how it is looked at in psychology, presence of positive affect and life satisfaction and absence of negative affect. Here affect basically means emotions, in a sense of emotional experience, affect word is used. So, subjective well-being is measured using emotional experiences. What is your frequency of positive emotions experience and negative emotions. So, if you are experiencing more positive emotion as compared to negative emotions, then your affect balance is positively toned. So, that means your emotions are positive and it is more aligned with subjective well-being, or it will contribute to subjective well-being, plus life satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your life? What kind of judgment you put yourself when you evaluate your life by seeing whatever has happened in your life. So, are you satisfied with your life? In general, one can measure, also we can measure domain wise. We can say, are you satisfied with your professional life, are you satisfied with your personal life, and so on. We can have satisfaction in the different domains also. We can have a satisfaction in general also about the whole life total. Now, this is how it is conceptualized. Now, subjective well-being is, in the layman term, it is also called as happiness. So, when we use the term happiness in psychology, we are typically basically talking about subjective well-being or hedonic well-being. So, happiness is a layman term which also sometimes used in the literature on psychology. Basically, it connotes the idea of subjective well-being or hedonic well-being. So, researchers have conceptualized and measured happiness or subjective well-being with two different ways. One is affect balance, indicating more positive emotions, pleasures and the less or more positive emotions as compared to unpleasant emotional state, and this is essentially an aggregate of how one feels in the different moments of life recently. The other is life satisfaction, which goes beyond momentary feeling to invoke an integrative evaluative assessment of one's life. Okay. So, subjective well-being consists of three components. One is life satisfaction, the presence of positive mood or emotions, and the absence of negative mood, taken together often summarized as happiness. Okay. So, how this is basically conceptualized? Here it is. So, subjective well-being, we can also call it as a happiness. So, presence of positive mood or emotion, we can say, plus absence or basically in comparison to that plus life satisfaction. So, this presence of positive mood and absence of negative mood, this is also called as affect balance. So, what is the balance of your emotional experience, So, as compared to positive emotions and negative emotions, what is the balance? Are you experiencing more positive emotion as compared to negative emotions? What is the balance of it? Obviously, you cannot have completely absence of negative emotions, which is rare. So, presence of positive mood, if it is more than the negative moods or emotions, then it will contribute to higher subjective well-being or happiness. And if you are more satisfied with your life, it will also contribute to higher subjective well-being or happiness. So, this is how it is conceptualized and measured in psychology. So, one can measure what is the level of subjective well-being or happiness of a person experiencing in this moment. Based on the measurement of these emotions, there are standardized tools to measure that, and life satisfaction, we can have a score for happiness of a person or happiness of or subjective well-being of a person. So, this is how country level well-being index and happiness index are calculated. They also have more parameters when country level indexes are made, but this can be calculated and a score can be given to person based on how they are experiencing all these things. Now, how eudynamic well-being is conceptualized in psychology? In psychology, the eudynamic well-being is, which basically kind of criticizes hedonic well-being, which says it's an hedonic well-being is an incomplete kind of definition, and they said it is well-being should be conceptualized more than just emotions and life satisfaction. So, eudynamic well-being addresses this criticism by conceptualizing well-being in terms of positive functionings, meaning in life, pursuing worthwhile goals, actualization of inner potential and so on. So, these are some of the concepts that we have already discussed, how eudynamic well-being looks at it. So, in psychology, the core of wellness is not how pleasantly or unpleasant one feels, which is the main concept in hedonic well-being. It is more about how you function in life. So, eudynamic well-being is more concerned with functioning in response to challenges in life. How are you able to function in life? That is the major concept in eudynamic well-being, and in hedonic well-being, major focus is given on how you are experiencing life in terms of emotions, in terms of whether you are satisfied or not with your life and so on. So, the focus is more here in the functioning aspect. So, eudynamic well-being is also called psychological well-being. So, technically in psychology we call it as psychological well-being. Hedonic well-being is called as subjective well-being. Eudynamic well-being is called as psychological well-being technically in the literature of positive psychology. Now, one of the most common ways by which eudynamic well-being or psychological well-being is conceptualized in positive psychology is using the reefs this person, this researcher Riff, his conceptualization using 6 dimensions of psychological functioning. So, they use these 6 dimensions to conceptualize eudaimoc well-being. So, if these 6 dimensions are present more and more in your life, you will have more and more eudaimoc well-being in your life. So, this includes things like autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relationship with other, purpose in life, self-acceptance. We will discuss a little bit about each of these things when we discussed a theory which combines both eudaimoc and hedonic well-being. So, this component we will be briefly talking about in the upcoming class, upcoming slide. So, this is one of the model which is most of the researcher use this conceptualization when they measure eudaimoc well-being. They measure it in terms of autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relationship, purpose in life, self-acceptance and so on. And eudaimoc well-being in psychology it is called as a psychological well-being. Now, as I said that in psychology we generally have this idea that the holistic sense of well-being or true sense of well-being happens only when you combine both hedonic aspects of well-being and eudaimoc aspects of well-being in your life. Okay. Hedonic aspects itself may be a partial truth or it can contribute to positive experiences in life, but then it may be more momentary and it may not contribute to long term concept or sustainable states, where eudaimoc well-being can contribute to that, more sustainable states where you lead a meaningful life and contribute to a greater purpose and so on. So, pursuing each of them may not give a complete picture of well-being. So, the basic idea in psychology is that right balance of hedonic well-being as well as eudaimoc well-being is important for true sense of experiencing true sense of well-being. So, in that sense certain theories were developed which combines the dimensions of eudaimoc well-being as well as hedonic well-being in their conceptualization or model of well-being for positive mental health and so on. So, 2 such theories we will be discussing today. One is called as Key's 13 dimensions of mental health as a flourishing. So, this is one model which combines both hedonic and eudaimoc well-being, and the second model that we will talking about here is Martin Seligman's model of flourish, which is also called as PERMA model. So, we will see these 2 model very briefly how they conceptualize well-being. Now, let us look at the Keyes. It is the name of a person, Corey L.M. Keyes. So, he proposed a model of mental health, or it is a model of flourishing also it is called as, which includes hedonic well-being and psychological or eudaimoc well-being also, plus societal aspects of well-being in his model. So, he distinguished the state of flourishing from the state of languishing. So, he said human being can experience a state of flourishing, or when that flourishing is absent, we can call the person is experiencing something called as languishing. So, these 2 terms, when we experience flourishing, when we experience languishing, he kind of defined it here. So, the state of flourishing is combination of high level of subjective well-being and optimum level of psychological and social well-being. Okay. So, when you are experiencing high subjective well-being, high psychological and social well-being, when all the 3 aspects are high, then you are experiencing a state called as flourishing. On the other hand, state of languishing is a combination of low level of subjective well-being and low level of psychological and social well-being. So, when you experience low levels in all the 3, your state of well-being can be called as languishing. So, this is opposite of flourishing, and those who are not experiencing flourishing, neither flourishing nor languishing, they will have moderate level of mental health. They will be somewhere in between that. So, what are the components of his model? He said positive mental health or flourishing includes 3 dimensions, 3 categories of factors. One is called as positive emotions, or which is called as emotional well-being. If you see, this is connected to hedonic well-being. positive emotions are connected to the concept of emotional well-being. Second is positive psychological functioning. These are related to psychological well-being or kind of eudaimonic well-being. Third one is positive societal functioning, which is again kind of related to eudaimonic well-being. Okay? So, he said state of mental health or positive mental health or flourishing includes these three important set of factors. One is whether you are experiencing positive emotions in your life, which will be called as emotional well-being, whether you are experiencing positive psychological functioning, which will be called as psychological well-being, which is connected to the eudaimonic well-being, and the third is called positive social functioning, which is also called as a social well-being. So, psychological well-being and social well-being are more connected to the concept of eudaimonic well-being. So, this is a model that combines well-being, conceptualized well-being as a combination of both hedonic as well as eudaimonic well-being. Now, let us see what are these three factors, in what kind of things are included under this. So, positive emotions, the first factor called emotional well-being includes typical hedonic well-being or subjective well-being measure that we have discussed. So, it includes positive affect means positive emotions. So, whether we are regularly experiencing cheerfulness, interested in life, good spirit, happy, calm, peaceful, full of life and so on. These are indicators of positive emotional states or positive affect. It also includes things like about quality of life, means mostly higher satisfied with the life overall or in domains of life. So, if you are more satisfied with life, then you are also having higher emotional well-being. So, this includes typical emotional well-being includes things like positive emotional experiences and higher satisfaction with the life. So, this is one factor that we discussed. Second is psychological well-being, which is connected to the eudaimonic well-being, and it is basically the factors are connected to the RIFs, the 6 dimensions that we discussed. Now, here it is the definitions of each dimensions are given. So, psychological well-being includes things like, which is related to positive psychological functioning, self-acceptance, which means when you hold positive attitude towards yourself, you acknowledge, like and most part of your self personality. So, you have a higher self acceptance when you have positive attitude towards your own self. You generally have a positive attitude towards yourself. You do not deny or you do not kind of complain about yourself. You do not just compare yourself with other people too much, and your self esteem goes down and so on. Those things are generally not connected to self acceptance. You generally like most part of your personality, and that sense of self acceptance is there. Obviously, you can keep improving and so on, but you have positive attitude about yourself. So, that comes under self acceptance. Personal growth, which is connected to the positive psychological functioning, is about when you seek challenge, has insight into own potential, feels a sense of continued development. Personal growth happens when you are continually expanding in life, building your skills, having more insights about your own potential and growing in those direction. Third factor is related to purpose in life, when you find own life has a direction and meaning. When you see your life is purposeful, meaningful, there is a direction in life, you are going in certain ways meaningfully and so on. Environmental mastery is about exercising ability to select, manage, mold personal environment to suit needs. To what extent you have control over the environment in which you live. This may be connected to the skills and so on also. Do you have ability to exercise selecting things and controlling things, managing things in your life and so on? If you have, then you are having higher environmental mastery. Autonomy is related to whether you are guided by your own volition, own inner direction, internal standards and values. If you have more freedom to choose and direct your life according to what you wish to do, then you have more autonomy in life. If you are constrained by others' direction all the time, then you have less autonomy. So, if you are more guided by your own internal standards and you are able to direct your life according to your own standards and thought processes, then you have higher autonomy, which is also connected to higher psychological well-being. Positive relationship with other is the last factor, which is related to whether you are able to, do you have or can you form warm, trusting personal relationship. So, what kind of quality of relationship you have with other people in your life, that determines the positive relationship. This plays very important role in psychological well-being. the quality of relationship with other people, because as a human being we are social animal and we don't live alone. So, we all the time interact with other people, and the quality of relationships, the quality of support that we get from other people plays very important role in your well-being of life. No? Especially also when you find difficulties, face difficulties in life, if you have people to count on and so on, you can cope with the problems of life in much more better ways and so on. So, the positive relationship plays very important role. These are the 6 dimensions connected to the positive functioning in life, or which is called positive psychological well-being, the dimensions. The third factor is related to positive social functioning or social well-being. According to Key's model, social well-being includes things like social acceptance, which basically talks about holds positive attitude towards, acknowledges and accepts of human differences. So, basically there is a sense of acceptance of different kind of people in the society, the differences, you have generally positive attitude towards other people in the society. So, that is called social acceptance. Social actualization is the next factor. When it believes people, groups and society have potential and can even grow and positively evolve. When you have a positive attitude towards the society's ability or potential to grow, positively evolved, then you have something called as a social actualization. Then you will contribute to the society in terms of evolving society in a better ways. Then comes social contribution, sees own daily activities as useful to and valued by the society and others. To what extent you see yourself as a contributing factor in the society and so on. So, that is called social contribution. The next one is called social coherence. It is about interested in society and social life and finds them meaningful and somewhat intelligible. Basically means when you show interest in social aspect of life, social life, and find it's meaningful and you are kind of interested and engaged with it, then that is called as a social coherence. And the last one is called social integration. It about a sense of belonging to and comfort and support from the community. So, are you able to integrate yourself in the social fabric in which you live? Do you feel a sense of belonging to the society or group or community you are living in? Do you find support and comfort in that society? Then if you find that, you have higher social integration. So, these are the important indicators of social well-being. So, we have emotional well-being, we have psychological well-being, we have social well-being and the different components associated with it. All these things contribute to our true sense of well-being, contributes to well-being from the different aspects. So, that is called as Key's model of flourishing or well-being, which combines both hedonic as well as eudaimoc concepts. The next model that we will be talking about here is Seligman's PERMA model of well-being. This model also combines both hedonic as well as eudaimoc concepts in terms of promoting well-being. So, according to this model, these 5 components are very important to experience well-being in one's life. He conceptualized well-being as a combination of both hedonic and eudaimoc well-being components. So, he said true well-being can be conceptualized in terms of PERMA. PERMA is an acronym for positive P, engagement E, R for relationships, M for meaning, A for achievement. So, that is an acronym for PERMA, which basically means the first component is positive emotions. So, feeling good, which was also part of Key's model that we discussed earlier. So, that is related to hedonic well-being. So, this is related to a hedonic. If you see all the other part, these are generally connected to eudaimoc well-being. Okay. So, very briefly let us see what are these components. So, positive emotion, as we said, it includes emotions such as amusement, hope, interest, joy, love, compassion. All the emotions when we experience and it kind of expand us, we feel good about it. So, those are like positive emotions, and positive emotions we will discuss in detail in the coming module also. In detail we will have a module on positive emotions, where we will be discussing in detail about positive emotions and how it influences us and so on, how can we enhance that and so on. So, positive emotion can broaden our thoughts and actions and build many resources. This theory we will be talking about later. So, this is very important part of how we experience life. Positive emotions are very important in our life And typically when we talk about happiness, we generally talk about positive emotions. So, this is very important component of hedonic well-being and the PARMA model of Seligman. Engagement is very important in the well-being part. So, engagement is about finding flow experiences. The flow experiences happens when you are intensely focused on the task at hand and the present moment that will lose track of time. So, if to what extent you are engaged with life or the things that we do in life, how much flow experiences you experiences. So, flow is another concept that we will be discussing in the upcoming modules, where we will be talking about. So, if you are very much engaged and find a lot of satisfaction, internal motivation in doing things that you are doing in your life, then you are highly engaged. So, this sense of engagement is very strong. So, you will be fully engaged and in the moment and doing things, and well-being flows out of engagement. So, flow, such kind of engagement state improves well-being, happiness, satisfaction in life and so on. So, this is very important aspect of well-being. So, this is engagement. We will be talking more about them in the upcoming modules. Then comes relationship, which we already have discussed, was also part of Key's model earlier discussed, positive relationships, because our connection with others plays very important role, because we are social creatures and it impacts our well-being very strongly. Positive support can be a good source of coping during difficulties and stressful situation. If other people are supporting you, then you can deal with lot of difficulties and problems in life as compared to when you are alone. So, people with high social support experiences less stress and cope more successfully and so on. So, relationship is part also will be, there is a whole module on positive relationships. We will be discussing more about that later. The next component is meaning in life. Again, meaning in life is about doing valuable things, worthwhile things in your life. You feel your life has meaning, you are doing things which are important. It involves belonging to, serving something that we believe is greater than just yourself. So, the meaning in life has so many components that we will be discussing. There is another whole module on meaning in life and so on. We will be discussing about that also later. The last one is accomplishment. It is about things that we have done or accomplished in our life. It is about working and reaching our goals. So, accomplishment is about setting goals and reaching goals. So, more you achieve goals, important goals in your life, more you feel accomplished in your life, and which also contributes to your sense of well-being in your life. So, even small goals such as doing half an hour exercise every day and making efforts to achieve them give a sense of accomplishment, happiness and well-being. So, accomplishment does not mean you have to achieve something great in your life. Even small things in our life, when we give them importance, some important components of our everyday life, if you can set them certain goals and achieve them, for example, maintaining half an hour exercise every day, if you are able to maintain it for certain sustained time, it will give you a sense of accomplishment and so on. There is another concept called grit, which is connected to the concept of accomplishment. It is associated with the idea of accomplishment. So, it is about perseverance and passion for long term goals, which introduced by Angela Duckworth. So, people, when you have a high sense of grit, you are able to persevere for a long term goal. Short term goal everybody can achieve, but the difficulties comes when you have a long term goal. People generally lose motivation and then they are not able to sustain efforts and so on. So, people who are gritty or people who have a high sense of grit, they are able to persevere and accomplish long term goals. So, that is something very also important factor in achievement and accomplishment in life. People who exhibit grit persevere at the goals over time, even in the face of failures and adversities. So, this is an important quality that also increases the sense of accomplishment. So, these are some of the things. So this is the model, these are the two models, Seligman's PARMA model and Key's model of mental health and flourishing. This model shows that they kind of define the true sense of well-being. It can only be achieved when you combine both hedonic well-being as well as eudaimonic well-being. So, these are some of the concepts related to the foundational, this sense of well-being is the foundation of positive psychology. All the other things are associated with this concept. So, well-being we have understood how it is connected to positive mental health, how it is related to hedonic well-being, how it is related to eudaimonic well-being, and how both should be integrated for achieving a true sense of well-being. So, with this I stop here. Thank you.